We welcome receive greetings from the Social Security Inter-American Conference on behalf of our General Secretary, Dr. Gibran Ramirez, and myself, Daisy Corrales, Director of CS. We are here to help you for this important activity you're participating in, representing three countries from Argentina, Guatemala, and Mexico, in a way that we have one of the most representativeness of the reality of handicappedness in the Americas. In 2011, the World Health Organization said that more than 2 million people in the world live with a certain minor capacity due to physical damage because of a disease or because of any mental health issue. And these are the main causes nowadays. There are almost 200 million people who have considerable difficulties in their functionality. And I think that we all in our life cycles, we have gone through periods with diminished capacities, for instance, and the aging itself, where some of our capacities decrease and with some complications, for instance, during pregnancy, that would prevent us from having 100% of capacities, and also through the recovery periods and in our life cycle of our human beings, we have difficulties in some of the different stages in order to exploit the full potential. From Social Security, the NGOs, the civil society, and all institutions have been presenting different scenarios and proposals to attend and especially try to guarantee people their performance in their everyday life to prevent barriers due to the diminished capacities has been an intensive work. And here we have had assistance of important development of all technological areas, for instance, in the creation of processes, and now with 3D um, technologies that have attained big progresses, have given us a lot of guidelines in Americas about the infrastructure for the physical barriers for the entrance and access into the venues, and so many other topics. But one of the concerns that we would like to elaborate more is the human rights subject. So it is not only that we can apply the regulations and about the standards and technological progress, but we also need to go into uh, viability of this technological uses and community rehabilitation. It is a transit in the service provision and all the public services to society, the organization of the communities themselves, the local governments, and it is important to cascade down the attitude of society towards the handicappedness. In that regard, we thank the cooperation of Argentina, Guatemala, and Mexico, who share with us their experience. And from the Inter-American Conference on Social Security, we have the commitment to continue to work on this important subject. Today's webinar, the chairman will be Mr. Quintanar, who is the expert dealing the research subjects in the Inter-American Commission on Health and Well-being for Social Security. So in that regard, he will continue with the organization of this webinar, and we welcome each and every one of the participants in this webinar, and also we welcome our presenters. And thank you very much for being with us. Thanks a lot. Good morning, good afternoon for us. This is a good afternoon already. And above all, I thank the trust of Dr. Daisy to work on the subjects of the webinar in this group, because it is a subject that in my view, in my professional performance, I have been linked with different aspects about it. And it seems to me that it is not enough to change the concepts on handicappedness. which have been evolving a long time, nor the development of techniques which are exclusively physical. There's also the need to have a training of human resources, new visions, new approaches, more oriented to the social and the human sides. And above all, we have a lot of work to conduct so that handicappedness is included in our lifestyle and is considered in our culture, which is not anything alien to us. And the people with some handicappedness can have the place they deserve because of their rights and their attainments, and not only because of legislations or laws that many times are alien to us. In this regard, the webinar organization will be oriented to share updated information which is accessible to the countries in the Americas and the Caribbean on some options and proposals of attention to handicappedness that go from this technological development that I have mentioned before, this community vision, which is a multitask, and with new approaches that we will see during the development of the subject. In this regard, we can start offering a presentation on this subject and recalling that handicappedness has a long history and a long path from the Romans, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Greek, the Aztec, and the Inca, the Maya. All of them had a vision. No matter where they live, in which continent they were at what time, they had a vision, and this evolved until we can perceive handicappedness as a condition that deserves to be served and not refused or hidden as sometime it was. In that regard as well, it is intended that this webinar has a target to share those experiences and above all, with intention and the goal that people will find options that are close to their possibilities and a modification of their attitude before handicappedness. Going into the program, we have our first panel member, Dr. Marco Antonio Cubillo Leon. He is a surgeon expert in rehabilitation medicine. He is a master's in gerontology in attention to elder people, and he has been developing research guidelines of subjects not less complex as the aging, handicappedness, and multitask rehabilitation. He established the Physical Occupational School at Puebla University. He's the co-founder of the Mexican University Center of Sciences and Humanities, the Pioneer School in Education for Physical Therapy in Mexico. The organizer of different commissions and entities, among which the Citizen Council on Handicappedness for the Municipality of Puebla, and he is the Dean of the Mexican University Center of Sciences and Humanities, and General Coordinator of the Multitask Center for Rehabilitation. I give you the floor, Dr. Cubillo. We continue with your presentation. Well, I thank formally and always warmly for this possibility to share in an event of this relevance, and above all, this concept of being able to share ideas with colleagues and professionals who are experts on the subject in our continent. In fact, what I will share with you is about what we are working since a long time ago. This is a university of private funding, 25 years of establishment. And as Fernando said, was the first university as such that create resources in physical therapy, occupational therapy, and Wattens therapy. And these resources in Mexico before that were formed in the social health institutions, the Ministry of Health, which will be the Ministry of Health for different other countries, and important organizations like the Mexican Institute of Social Security. With the intention to create technician experts. And I think that there's still some schools that keep on training technicians, but as a university, we are having some issues with the communication. Tonio, we are having an issue with the communication. We can no longer listen to you, Tonio, in a more integral way. And certainly, we will be able to learn a lot from our dear friend Karina Bustos. So thank you very much for this invitation, Fernando, and we will start with our presentation. First, we need to understand, and I agree with the presentations made at the beginning, we need to understand that the phenomenon of handicapness is part of human condition, and practically every person at some point in our lives can have a certain disability, either transient or permanently. Handicapness is a complex phenomenon. That is to say, when we say a complex phenomenon, for those of you who are not familiar with this scientific way of thinking, it implies that it is a phenomenon which does not have a single cause. It is not a phenomenon that can be related to a single cause. The other way around, it is a multifactorial phenomenon that in every person, in every family will perform differently. As a complex phenomenon, therefore, we have noticed and we have made criticism to the way of facing this phenomenon, in the sense that if we continue to analyze it in the thought that it will be corrected with therapy, with a prosthesis, or with visiting the doctor, that would be important. But if it is not made in an integral way, it wouldn't be easy to solve it if we don't analyze first that those who face the problem, we are working with people. The first thing is that in more than one of the moments of the introduction, we have always talked about people, and that is important. Unfortunately, many times, especially in health institutions, not only in Mexico, but in other countries, we tend to treat people as things and we give them a number or we call them patient of a certain disease. And I think that we need to start from the human point of departure to talk about people. And precisely in the Convention of People and the Rights of People with Disabilities, we need to refer to them people with a handicapness, not with the different capacities or disabled. No, we need to talk to them about them as people with a handicapness. And from that viewpoint, we need to start in the analysis of the context, both internally and externally, where that person develops. How big the problem is? Well, I have some figures that I extracted from the internet, updated practically to today, and I made a calculation of the figures, thinking on the countries where we are participating in this webinar as presenters. Talking about handicapness. According to WHO, we are somewhere around 7.8 million people in the world. We are 1,130,000,000 people who have a degree of handicapness, which is to say that could be from light to a serious problem. So what are we talking about? We're talking about 14.28% of the population. That, as you see, it is not a non-important figure. In Mexico, we apply the same data, it is estimated that we have more than 18 million people with a certain degree of handicapness in Guatemala. Using these figures and these rates, we're talking more of 2 million people, and in Argentina, almost 6.5 million people. To give you an example, this analysis is for the whole Latin America, but well, this is more or less an extrapolation. This 28% of the population with a certain degree of handicapness, it is not only the person who has it, but also the people related with it. And it has to do with their families. WHO says that the consequences of this can reach up to 40% of the population, because definitely the handicapness not only affects the person who has it, but the family and whoever lives close to that person with handicapness. At the end, we should remember that to understand and to face this problem of handicapness, and if we want to perceive it from a viewpoint in the social context where it is developed, we necessarily need to talk according to the social determinants of the World Health of Organization says that health and needs to be seen from the view of determinants of health. And just to remind you, let us consider that those determinants are all those circumstances where people are born, they grow, work, get old, and that includes all entities that constitute the social fabric, and especially the health system, including the social security system or the system for social security. All the circumstances need to be studied because at the end, it is the result of a distribution of power, money, resources that worldwide, nationally, or locally will depend on a series of policies adopted by every country, which directly include or have an influence on the status of health of the population. Some of you professionals of health might remember that a scheme that would tell us about the natural history of disease and would establish a pre-pathogenic period, and after the breaking of health, we would go into a pathogenic status. That is scheme of so many decades ago that we many of us learned when we were being trained as health professionals has been modified. And today I would like to introduce this scheme that was the work of so many activities of this commission. And we finally understand that the health disease phenomenon, and here we can call about the phenomenon of handicapness, not only depends on minimal handicapness, but for many other things, full social, economical, and political context, and things like governance, social policies, public policies, the part of culture that constitutes the structure of thought or of a certain society would lead us to analyze that a person with a handicapness will be influenced by its social economic position, by the way they occupy in a social structure. And well, we need to talk about social classes that person is part of. And even if we don't like to talk about that, it is a fact that we need to comment. And we need to also consider that in handicapness, there are factors like the level of education of a person with a handicapness and their family, their occupation, their income, and well, even more, their gender, ethnicity, or racism. Some years ago, when we had an event when we talk about handicapness from a gender view, we were talking about that the fact of being having a disability. If you're a woman, you're an elder person, and an indigenous person, then you start having not one but more than one disability or handicapness because of the social problems that surrounds us and how we are trying to understand how society works and how it affects the process of health. In this regard, all of that has an influence in material situations or psychosocial factors and things that have to do with our habits of life. And that in turn has an influence from a health system. It could be a social security system. And at the end, all these factors will directly have an impact on aspects of equality, health, and well-being. All of this, as you see, now we are no longer talking about a linear function as it was established by the scheme I mentioned before of Leverly Clark, but we are talking about a series of circumstances that have an effect on the phenomenon of handicapness, then promote or not the quality or inequality of attention to persons with handicapness. Therefore, you see that we are against in this moment. We find that the parameter of the traditional scientific method based in a reductionist paradigm where we always think that handicapness is 100% a biological consequence, or somebody will say, no, it is not biological, it is a social question. And some time ago, that this is a matter of human rights. Of course it is. But it is not only human rights and not only a biological problem either. In that regard, a complex thought, this new structure, current of thought, new in quotations, wouldn't say that the traditional scientific method is wrong, but it says that it is not sufficient. Because when we see a person with handicapness, we need to understand them from their environment of schooling and work, their professional development of who surrounds them and helps them, which is something else, from the viewpoint of the family, from the micro reality where they live in terms of economic and social status in the society and the context where they live. And it also has to do with aspects like the care of health, the social networks that are so important, and of course the macro reality, that is to say the world macro social and political environment that they're developed. In this regard, we need to say that the person is more than addition of different diagnoses, and it goes beyond a series of addition of diagnoses from different disciplines that participate in a rehabilitation process. It is far more than that. In this regard, handicapness or disability. And I love this sentence, and I took it from Karina Bustos in one of her presentations, and I kept it to Karina. And I always say that I took it from a presentation from you because I like saying that handicapness is like a shade on the lifestyle of a person. In fact, we're talking about a complex phenomenon. So then I wonder, and this is the question that I have that I want to share with you. Would it be necessary to change paradigms in the rehabilitation of a person with this disability? Well, we think that we need to change. We think that the professional models that currently do not include complexity are sure because they are not considered the whole problem that involves a person and their family. In this regard, we think that technical solutions are not enough before a complex problem. And for that, then, we are finding out that there are new pathologies that are related with an increase of disability in the population, and simultaneously it tells us that handicapness is not only addition of a specific problems, but we are facing a series of complex problems. So the challenge for rehabilitation is this the approach, focus on people, on the person, answering to a great amount of variables. And for that, we all need to have a professional development to participate in the process. And then we need to understand the problems that we're facing nowadays, and we will be able to face them in the traditional way in knowledge divided by disciplines. Well, our proposal is based in the development of a transdiscipline method in the environment of rehabilitation. And for those of you who don't know, I will say it as quickly as possible. What is that multitask method? It is a proposal that from the complex thought is established to face complex problems. In this regard, we would say that what we are aiming is to go beyond the view of transdiscipline. So it is an aspiration And we are in the process and aspiration to a knowledge as full as possible that is able to actually attain dialogue among the different knowledge of different people. Therefore, the dialogue of knowledge and the complexity, which are inherent to a multidiscipline attitude, because we focus the person as a question and also as a target. Commonly, when we talk about teamwork, we get confused with the words and we talk interchangeably about different uh, concepts, and in the same text they are used as if they were synonyms, and they are not. And so that is why I conduct this analysis, a model based on disciplines. I will try to explain it in a graphical way where the patient will be served by the addition of disciplines. Every person will see in the patient what they think the patient needs. A multidiscipline model would be one where different disciplines work on a patient. I would say that most of the social security models in the continent, in particular, I would talk about the model of Social Security in Mexico. It works with a multidiscipline model where there's a patient and there are different disciplines that take part in order to help the patient. But this model is a model that pushes the patient because it implies the addition of disciplines oriented to solve a problem. And well, that it stays there. It stays with the thought of reductionist scientific method. Well, the patient is at the center, but disciplines are separated. There are attempts to improve the system and to go to an interdisciplinary model with the goal to have better knowledge about a patient at the center. But now there is a dialogue among the different disciplines involved. This is a way, or this is a model that we intend to work, especially in large institutions. Many times we intend to go from a multidiscipline to an interdiscipline model. But the transdiscipline model goes beyond. It is a model where we are no longer talking about patients. We cannot talk about patients. We are talking about people with different disciplines working, and we're putting the person at the center of everything. The word patient needs to be continue to be used because it restricts our object of research, our reason of existence. But I like it less and less to talk about patients, and I prefer to talk about people. So here, the transdisciplinary model goes beyond it. This is a model where we share borders among the different disciplines and where everybody works from their discipline with a commitment to work in a coordinated way to focus on the person together with other disciplines. As you can see, they are not synonyms. They are very well-defined models. So the idea is that we go from a multidiscipline to a transdiscipline model where rehabilitation can have activities of prevention, habilitation, rehabilitation in order to integrate and include the these persons, which is we are intending. From the Transdisciplinary Institution of Rehabilitation, we have a group of professionals working, understanding the person as a biopsychosocial entity, and we are important, interesting, and numerous people or professionals that work to go from multi to interdiscipline. We are not there yet. We're in the process of going there. I would say the transdiscipline model is not so well consolidated as it could be in the case of the AlumCon in Buenos Aires and in some other centers, perhaps in Australia, Canada, Germany. But we are working to go to transdiscipline rehabilitation. Therefore, its essential goal is to address the person, understanding their identity, and not talking about the function. When I'm saying, oh, it's the person who is deaf, who is blind, or blind with a person, or a person who's limping. No, 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 it's a person, and that is important. We need to not to lose sight. And from there, The transdisciplinary methodology will be based on two strata, the functional reserve and the resilience capacity of the person. The territory done of social inclusion of the person is where we manifest the actual qualitative jump in rehabilitation.
And we think that this is where
we
we're
consider
going to go. So where are we now? You know, me myself, I'm from the Transdisciplinary Rehabilitation Institute in Puebla City, and this is where we try to go out and break those paradigms from my point of view, and I say it very respectfully, all paradigms that we have to cope with, because otherwise we will not be facing the problem indeed in order to try to overcome it. So let's give some greetings. I didn't want to say goodbye without inviting you to get into the Red Iberoamericana de Neurorehabilitación, where several institutions from several Ibero-American countries were working to build this model, what we understand as transdisciplinary rehabilitation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tonio. I didn't even see you. I didn't even care for you and the clock. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting. There are many things to talk about, and then let's go to our second speaker. Our second speaker is Nayela Sosa now. She is a dentist. She is a public health teacher by the National Institution of Public Health. Just got a great experience in community work with RBC strategies and ABC strategies too. From its background from the dental health, she's a methodological and statistic counselor in the Faculty of Odontology, and she's a paramedic in different specialties. She's also participated in the coordination of brigades and community work, because she coordinates the work with the center of the Peña Palmera from 2004 up to the present. She had a chance to participate as a speaker, where she was one of the great boosters of these events of the Second Continental Congress of Rehabilitation towards and including development in Oaxaca, Mexico, 2010, where she made this declaration, Oaxaca 2010. Without further delay, then Nayeli is going to present to us a topic on the model of rehabilitation based on the community in attention to disability and the evolutions it has had. Nayeli, please. Thank you very much. Well, I am going to talk to you. I'm Nayeli Sosa. I'm going to talk to you about the challenges and the successes that we've had in Peña Palmera with the work of the strategy RBC IBC strategy before disability in these moments of current moments we're living in. First of all, to tell you, a little bit of an idea of what Piña Palmera is. Piña Palmera has been working 36 years directly with disabled people, their families, and their communities. And we've got like 30 years working with the RBC strategy in the South Coast and Sierra in Oaxaca. RBC is a strategy that we have for rehabilitation based upon a manual published or issued by the OM WHO in '89, and Piña Palmera has centered it, which is like an actual inclusion based in the community. This is why it is IBC, Inclusión Basada en la Comunidad. The great objective of this strategy is to promote changes of attitude in the environment within the communities to make inclusive communities. Their great objective is the inclusion of people with disabilities within their communities, and all their strategies are focused on this work. with the PCDs and the families and the actors, social actors and community actors within this scope, so that this process will make accountable all the society sectors in order to have an inclusive community. Within the work we've been performing in Villa Palmera with people and the communities with disabilities through this strategy is, participating with the PCDs and the families, with their local promoters and local authorities also participate, and other community actors like teachers, healthcare personnel, transportation people, so on and so forth. So also the multidisciplinary team of Piña Palmera, which they have trainers, professional trainers with the occupational therapy, physiotherapy, language therapy, and as well as people with ear disability and visual disabilities, which train the people as for the sign language and braille language. So from these, we wanted to take this presentation towards the challenges that we've had with the experience of Piña Palmera, which is the lack of community information as for the disability goes, and the distance, geographical distance in the rural areas. So the communities have a great margination. And due to this isolation, many of the people in these communities have to migrate. And this has caused that people with disabilities indeed would live or have their processes with their great grandparents or other family members because their parents had to migrate from the communities. So this is one of the great challenges within these communities. Now, within the successes that we've had with the strategy of RBC and IBC is the visualization of people with disabilities in their communities. We've been able to have changes in their attitudes from the changes in the environment and the surroundings to make some adaptations for the people with disabilities, so on and so forth. We've been able to include those within their families, the PCBs, so that they participate on the activities of the the daily life activities in the family, working activities in the community, and also inclusion, education inclusion, which is a very important process, just like the social part of it. So with this, we've been breaking the discrimination circle within these communities from, these people, PCDs, or people with disabilities. Now, in this moment of pandemic and COVID, since this is a strategy based on the community and where we really look for the inclusion of people with disabilities, then Piña Palmera has faced several challenges. The first one, people with disabilities and their families are afraid of going out of their houses. They are places that are very distant from other places, so they have to take the public transportation, and this transportation has been diminished, so the access to trainings has been diminishing, or they don't even have training because they have no access to transportation. And also families are a little bit confused on how to go back to the process of collective processes because there is no socialization, which is paramount for people with disabilities, especially in these inclusion processes. On the economy, well, in this moment, so we know that it's very under hazard. So the field is forgotten already, and the zone where Piña Palmera work or people work is a rural social context, an indigenous also context. So we have this great challenge of being able to get them closer in order to socialize. And something that has been very strong nowadays is the breaking of educational inclusion of PBC and PDCs in these zones, rural and indigenous zones. The access to schools in these moments, there is no access to schools, and many of these communities do not have any energy, electrical energy, so they do not have a chance to access the educational processes that have been suggested as a strategy in order to solve the fact of not being able to go to school. So PCDs, or people with disabilities, have been isolated in this concept. Within these challenges, we've also had the cancellation of processes for the attention of these people with specialists. Piña Palmera, within discussion processes, we work with the community actors, and among these health actors, so on and so forth. But also for the processes that need medical attention, such as neurological attention or heart attention, rehabilitation doctors. So we have like links, and these processes nowadays are canceled. So there's a lack of medicines. So there are people, for example, with epilepsy, they do not have access to their medicine in these communities. In the healthcare centers, there are no doctors for the daily life of these people with disabilities. And without any medication or treatments, it's been kind of like more difficult every time. So these, in the end, we believe that will be turning into a health problem, public health problem, and it may be translated into greater discrimination problem in every scope, because they do not have access to health or socialization, neither to schools nor or any daily life processes, let's say. So within the actions of work that Piña Palmera has had to work with now is a greater periodicity of visits direct in home. The indirect to home in the zones with or people with disabilities, in order to tell them what is going on and tell them how the process is going, the rehabilitation process is going, contrast the isolation, and also see how we can continue to include them within their daily life activities. So this has been more frequently within the visits within home. And at the same time, we've been detecting new cases of disability within the communities. Oaxaca has a context where there is a lot of lack of information as for disabilities to do within the community. So the detection of these people is important in order to have the whole development of the inclusion activities in order to enhance their life of quality of life. We've been working with the linking with local authorities so that we will not stop the information processes. And in some communities, we work with the radio. So some of the promoters of the community process, which normally are the families of people with disabilities and the actual people with disabilities, they work within these spaces in the radio and the information, so that all the people with disability will hear about this, and then they will continue to be included within the processes. We've reactivated nowadays the training twice a month in communities with all the timely care measurements around COVID. Besides this, even though many of the communities work and are in the field, there are some others that do not, work in the field 100%. So we've been retaking within the activities with the families and the people with disabilities, and even with the people from the actual community, the orchards and self-consumption production in order to strengthen abilities. It may be part of the inclusion in order to, for the same activities, daily activities. And also Piña Palmera is working and has always worked through being an emotional reference. Now, the lockdown has brought many other situations, and Piña Palmera is a reference for disability people and members of families with with disabilities in order to cope with all these situations due to the lockdown. So indeed, the IBC strategy, what we really look for and the greater objective is to promote all the community changes so that the people with disabilities are included within the communities in all the scopes. In this moment, it's been a little bit difficult to work with the communities, but we've been able to reactivate it. We're going there twice a month, so on and so forth. It's been a challenge indeed, but we've been able to work and a little bit like addressing this part. Nevertheless, in the social and educational scopes, we see that inclusion is not easy for disabled people, mainly in the rural environment. Well, Piña Palmera is in the south region of the Oaxacan coast, so these are the contact details for those who would like to have contact with them. Piña Palmera also works with volunteers, and they can give you some more detailed information about the strategies they work with and in all these pieces of information. Thank you very much. I hope I was not that fast. I didn't want to go pretty deep within the contexts, but I hope I've been able to give you enough information about the strategy and the challenges that we face within Piña Palmera for the community work and the inclusion of people with disabilities in all the community processes in this COVID situation. Thank you very much, Nayeli. It is nice to remember lots of the work that you've been doing, and of course, you retake your proposal. We thank you for your participation. We invite you to continue with us because we have another speaker, who's Karina Bustos. All right. Karina Bustos is a founder, member, and president of the Alunco Foundation, founder and general director of Vinci Consultoria, Transdisciplinar, and she's also a consultant in method-centered on identity, complexity analysis, and transdiscipline. She's also the head of the Cátedra UNESCO project, a change of paradigm in education quality, and transdiscipline. She's a director of research of the Investigación Research Institute in Alunco, and she's also the head of diploma courses of rehabilitation transdisciplinary method in the Catholic University, and she's also a teacher of neurorehabilitation in the Mexican University Center of Humanities. Karina is also going to talk to us about the VETAS method in order to talk about neurorehabilitation. And then we give you the floor, Karina, as well as the camera. Thank you very much. We'll listen to you. Well, can you hear me now? All right, then perfect then. Well, the first is to really thank you for this invitation and, to share a dialogue space and exchange space, because I think it is going to give us a chance to cope with the challenges that we have. So it's a pleasure and my deepest thanks in order to share this moment with you. Well, then I have to tell you that a long time ago, from the beginning of my career, I'm a psychologist. But from the very beginning, I worked with the disability issue. And indeed, that took me in order to rethink what the methods were for, to work with this. When talking about rehabilitation and all those materials used for the person with disabilities, so what really called me to this was in order to research, and find out about the impact of our practices. I think I cannot stop referring to the moment we're dealing with now, and in this sense, why I want to talk about new methods and why it is necessary to talk about methods, as it was perfectly developed by Dr. Cubillo Leon, the need of transdisciplinary, which today gives us the chance to try to solve some of these issues. I cannot uh, stop talking about the circumstances under we are, under which we are. So I also talk about the ever-growing complexity, and that now makes us rethink which would be our practices. So the very first thing is that all of our system of attention to a disabled person is being influenced by different questions, different issues, and this pandemic uncovered, among other weaknesses that healthcare systems have. It was not outside this challenging problem, the topic of disabled people. So the concept of complexity makes us think that under this context, being able to give solutions implies, among other things, to rethink as humankind, to rethink ourselves in a biological and psychological and cultural and social sense. We have to think of ourselves as a species. And the last talks I give, I always say that it really calls my attention that if we will not be extinguished like the dinosaurs, because indeed COVID has made us under an isolation situation globally. So this really impacts people with some disabilities. So we have to see the world in a complex way. We have to change the thinking ways and our paradigms in order to place this object and this situation under which we are living with, and we want to start it without separating it from the context it belongs to. So we have to dialogue about knowledge and a way to rethink the organization of knowledge in order to reach a pertinent knowledge. That is to say, this level of ever-growing complexity makes us rethink that we need new methods to give answers, among other things, to the most vulnerable populations. This pandemic context made it evident that the group of people with disabilities are the most affected ones. Although, on the other hand, I cannot stop saying, in a second place, that all our practices nowadays are, in some sense, guided by these international documents like the Convention of People with Disabilities and the World Report on Disabilities. And both, as it was said at the beginning of the presentation of today's talk, the importance of understanding this as a raw or law rule. So we have to understand the equality of opportunities, but also the report issued by the WHO has a chapter that talks about rehabilitation, where we talk about three factors, but I will specifically talk about the therapy that have therapies that have an impact in the environment. And this is where we have the second level of why we ask which are the new methods that we have to contextualize and apply. So these demands in some way or another being able to understand that our methods have to be contextualized. That is to say that definitely there should be a dynamic identity that we have to understand, and as said by a philosophy, you just don't ask me who am I and don't ask me to be the same one. So the context is always changing, and the identity of the people that we would deal with has a changing dynamics. So under this context where there is a changing dynamics, definitely we run the risk of dehumanizing when we also put ourselves in a rehabilitation centered on the hegemony of technique. In this sense, we have to say the deconceptualized traits of the language centered on identity without having an adequate method leads us to a great, you know, very far from the possibility to think of inclusion of people with disabilities. This is we talk about the need of method centered on identity. So this leads us to a great controversy because the concept of identity has been a concept which has been difficult to define from social sciences, sociology, psychology, and anthropology. We talk about this in different ways in order to contextualize identity. But I would say that we live clearly with the definition that, in generally speaking, we're talking about an intrinsic identity and a social identity, which is under a dialectics and a dynamics which is permanent, and they have to be centered mutually. So, in the challenge of neuro rehabilitation, talk about the fact that we need to use method, as said by Nicolescu, based upon tools that have to be adjusted and operate with an open system in the understanding and intervention of a particular system. As we said, that the person with disabilities, in this case, in the way that our methods of new rehabilitation may be also only based in the intertechnicism, it's not only going to be dehumanize the scenario, but we also have a problem of not being able to incorporate, neither solve or give responses to a chaotic situation. Priogin says that the open systems are characterized for incorporating levels of complexity and chaos in order to elaborate new responses, to transform and acquire a greater level of consciousness and complexity in the methodology. And in this, I think that we solve the question of our methods of neurorehabilitation. We have to respect this level of analysis of complexity that is going to be summed up in the concept of identity as a multiple unit. This multiple unit where it says that we're being individual beings, but also psychological and cultural and social, biological beings, spiritual beings, and at the same time, each and every one of us is different. This concept of multiple unity will let us have plans and clinics, therapeutical clinics, and community therapeutical clinics that will allow us to understand this complex unit. We're made up similar but also different. So this is how we have this in our clinical practice and research practice, a centered method on identity and based on the analysis of complexity of transdisciplinary discipline. This work was issued and elected as a work that gives to topics linked to life quality in patients with neurological pathologies. And a little bit of what this study shows us is that actually, as it is characterized by a method that is placing in the center of the method identity, even in pathologies of that are degenerative, that we're losing functionality, The patient increases the perception of life quality. So how can we associate these two variables? Well, clearly, when a human being, when a person with disabilities, that does not erase the difference of what happens with all of us, finds a real motivation that allows him to solve not only who he is, but also to recover these social participation perception, the quality of life increases even if he is losing functionality. That is to say that not the loss of functionality does not impact directly the perception of this, but there are things that uh, overcome as long as the treatment has identity in the center. This is characterized by him having stages. It's divided in a process which begins with a transdisciplinary assessment and a treatment that is psychoeducational in order to comply with the
The
maximum
maximal
aspiration.
aspiration, which is social inclusion of people with disability. That is to say, rehabilitation makes sense in terms that we include identity and participation. And this means that this patient in a process of neurorehabilitation is not only a person who will go to occupy a position, because that is okay, thinking that they could be laborly occupied, but there are two differences: that they can hold a job, but this capacity is not a bias to their identity. What this person needs to rediscover is that they have the right to solve and to participate on what they actually want to do as anybody else. And well, from the conditions in our countries could promote or not or include the identity, but this is a concept that we should manage. The truth is that this should be solved and being able to keep roles related to identity. This is a scheme on how we work in a rehabilitation team that can make the different disciplines dialogue, and we work this through weekly meetings with presentation of different results and evolution of the patient. And as you can see, we can dialogue both of the person, the neurologist, the physiatrist, and the physical therapist. And from here, we understand the relevance of participation, the active participation of patients in their treatment. And we understand that we need to generate the instruments so that the organization, the professional, the treating team, the patient, the family, and the social and community context can be included in the different levels of the reality of the person. This would be a transdisciplinary method that points to the solution of participation subjects, but essentially respects the levels of identity. For this, we not only need to keep the clinical or therapeutical or rehabilitation levels, but we need to go beyond with the subject of professional development in order to have a change of paradigms and not only consider local stimulation and to consider processes of identity and social inclusion. We need to rethink the way the professionals need and can get knowledge. And this is how we highlight three different points of development: the attitudes that have to do with the people, the technical development, and the level of leadership. That is to say, no professional should use a technique as a dogma, but they should use the best technique, which also matches with what they are, and the technique that would also allow them to develop the identity that they have. And for that, they develop these levels of development in three stages that go from the discipline itself to the concept of transdiscipline, the objective and the common language, which is the second level with attitude of transdiscipline and equipment, and the transformation to the equipment, and a third level that deals about management, the relevance of managing and having an impact. When we talk about the world report of generating therapies that can have an impact in the environment, then we are talking about that, about a team, about people and professionals who can measure the impact of their practice, not only in terms of functionality, but in terms of if they are actively participating with the patient in their communities. I will briefly tell you in order to reach the point of my summary. In this pandemics, in this quarantine, we had to stop physical or presential assistance, and this is why the team of covers are designed in 20 days. In practically a month, we were serving our patients virtually, and we developed a telerehabilitation platform that would allow us, above everything, to see the people, the families, and the patients, and to regather again. And this had different challenges. If the virtual aspect could be able to hold and have an impact on the emotional mood of patients, the occupation, if people would be able to get organized in their homes, and the problem of access to technology, because we have had to establish guidelines for learning for the people and their families, because there were people who would not have a computer and would only have a mobile cell. We have found some virtues in this virtual model, and in the future, something of this will remain because it gave us the benefit of seeing the functionality in the context, actual context of the patient. It was something different to go to their environment, to their beds, when we see architectural barriers and the environment of the family where they live in that can help prevent their improvement. And this is why we include the direct participation of relatives and caregivers. And finally, to have a clearer domicile relay to identify the obstacles for people to be autonomous and independent. In this platform, we have included all the processes, the clinical ones that go from the assessment, the treatment, and the clinical management instrument that have to do with the reports and resources as presentations, videos, graphical material, and most importantly, the psychoeducation, because people have access to the capacity to replicate or repeat their exercises at home. The most important thing, and going back to the beginning, and with this I will close, is that we were able to be close. And this is why we have a satisfaction measurement with two variables that had to do with the therapist, and this gave us 33% of a very satisfactory feeling on the life experience in spite of distance and virtuality, and 22% of totally satisfied. And the next tells us about the fact that if we understand if the treatment was able to help with a specific problem, 50% said it made things improve a little bit. 25% said that things improve a lot. And well, these are slightly smaller values, but I'm interested to state as follows. If in a pandemics, if in our space, our gap is to include and to be close to the identity of people with disability. What these results made possible, that most of them are satisfactory, and in some cases very satisfactory, it is precisely because we were able to perceive the relevance of being close to what the patient needs. They needed contact, social interaction, they needed to feel included and to feel the closeness of the treating team. And then the results of the functionality will remain for a different moment for the direct management, but the challenge continues to be the same, to be close to the identity of the patient, to make them feel included by the team, or included because they understand that we are conducting actions for their actual social participation. The only social participation which is possible is the one that respects the rights of people with disability. Thank you very much. Well, Karina, It was an interesting presentation. Thank you for that. We all are making notes on everything that you have presented to us. Thank you. We'll also invite you to remain to listen to the next presentation. We had to have an adjustment due to situations and responsibilities of last minute. Dr. Rosie Lizaldana will not be present, but we also have the participation of one of her co-workers, who is Karina Rodriguez, and she is a surgeon, a physician at USAC in Guatemala, a rehabilitation doctor with applied epidemiology expert studies. She is an epidemiologist of IHSS and vice president of the board of CONADI. And she is the head delegate to the Council for Attention of Social Security in Guatemala in that field. All our panel members have been authors of different books and articles. And if you are interested, you can see them through the internet. Dr. Karina Rodriguez will introduce the rehabilitation tool before COVID-19. Karina, we give you the floor. Thank you for your support and your hurry to be here with us. We give you the floor. We cannot hear Karina. Can you hear me now? Okay, now we can hear you. Okay, thank you very much for this invitation, for inviting us, and well, Breaking Barriers, which is the title of my presentation. This is a direct review on what we will share with you, what the Guatemalan Social Security Institute has worked during the pandemics in the context of integral rehabilitation. The rehabilitation hospital is part of the group of the Social Security group of hospitals in the country, and with the guidelines of sustainable development and focus on 1, 2, and 6, and 8, that all constitute the basis of the Social Security, which is related with efficiency, health, and attention to disease. That has led us to move all our programs in a parallel way. So the Institute has a strategic goal as an institution that includes the fostering of assistential practices that considers culture, the institutional part, the part of the sports and education in order to lead a person with a disability to development of their potential. So with this, we are a landmark hospital with a team of 20 professionals, a multitask team for the attention, both in the pediatric and adult patients sides, and being the leader of this that contributes to social economic development of the Guatemalan population led us to that responsibility in the moment when we have our patients to have options. And we develop programs. And as we can see, the team of pediatric therapy is serving 500 children, and the adult team, we have a big group of colleagues who are recording videos and they are sending to the patients. And with this guideline, we have the monitoring both of the individual or group work as it is pertinent. We have the speech therapy, occupational therapists, psychologists, social workers, and the part of the pediatric rehabilitation, because we know that the life opportunity of children is now, and they will no longer be that age. The idea is not to limit their maximal potential they can reach. Likewise, with the support of technicians in prosthesis and orthosis for the development of the devices. So when we enter in the telerehabilitation process, we entered the institutional vision to have that coverage of service that would lead us to define that even if the international guidelines and the country guidelines and everything we were working on were telling us that we have to have the disinstitutionalization of the patient in a definite way. And we were not able to leave them alone. So we developed some videos that because of time, we were not able to upload them. But if you need them, we can generate the links to share them with you to show how to move the patient, the prevention of areas of pressure at the level of odontology patients. We show through videos the complete and correct way of cleaning the teeth. And we have a package of printed guidelines to take the printed physical part, but we also have 4 video packages so that the visual and technical part can be conveyed in the best possible way to the patient. Our goal is, well, finally working with high performance teams and to look um, the, 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 the best of our patient during the pandemics. We decided not to stop. What we are managing is among our strategic goals is to increase the coverage, to look for financial robustness, but above all, our provision of quality, no matter if the quality is being made from home or if the patient is not directly before us, that link of having that assistance was the most important challenge for us to carry out every one of the goals. And among the institutional goals and the unit, we had the responsibility, the attitude of service, which are the main reasons to take this step. Everybody in the team started to be trained and to look for the technological means, and we are using the platform that the patient can have access to. So we started the whole process with the patients with deficiencies that would lead them to major disabilities or more dependency, and the programs that we were not able to work presentially, we look for means so that interaction could take place without affecting our management model. Here, I will not go deeper. We also have integral rehabilitation, and we have a whole functional infrastructure. However, our metrics and indicators is based in this line that we have established as our backbone. What was the main strength to have that group of allies, strategic allies that will do the work? And I share, for instance, the experience with the committee in favor of blind and deaf people. And there, that was a place for practice with children with hearing disability, so that they can have a safe inclusion in the labor environment, and they give us the support of training to learn the sign language. This didn't stop. We continue to have that part now virtually, but we have that support and the courses continue, and the support activities with the technology, those who have it, we continue to do that in the different communities. We are still online providing support to the rehabilitation, the doctor's training, the physical therapist, as you can see, and every one of them is receiving the practical and the inclusion part or portions of this method to properly learn the techniques, but being able to have this direct supervision, because given that we have a small amount of presential patients that due to medical reasons or the adaptation of prostheses or different devices with our protocol for the prevention of COVID, we are having a small percentage of inclusion, and we are serving them physically in a presential way. So we always see the person under the disability condition in an integral way. We make the social and cultural part of their life a part of their everyday life. We don't forget our dates, and that is what we are using today in our task of rehabilitation. At all times, we're looking for the opportunities where we culturally could have, for instance, this month we are celebrating the fair in our environment. We are having remote activities to improve communication and speech, and with the different actions that we can take in the context of the presential and the remote modes that allow us to continue fulfilling our goals. Our mission and vision, as you can see, includes the institution, but we are intended to continue to serve remote services in a humanized way with a multitask team providing that specialized assistance for people who need that therapy through professional teams. We are intending to include them in that biophysical social environment, but providing support to the students, both of the medical and rehabilitation student and the students of physiotherapy and occupational therapy and for nursery, etc. So we are intending to take that sense, feeling of sensitization, but also the feeling of robustness. And our vision is to become the best hospital to provide attention to the people with some kind of disability, as could be facing some disabilities through the options that we provide them, both for rehabilitation of adults and integral rehabilitation of children. And we have looked for the establishing or the strengthening of alliances. We used to teach hydroponics to our patients with some entrepreneurs, with the ministries of agriculture, for instance. And this is improving. We are developing these programs, and we are intending that every institution that could have, like INTECAP, that could offer remote education, would allow us to include our users who might need an improvement in their educational level, either in terms of technical knowledge or education more oriented to some job. This time we are more focused on telework and telejob, and we are teaching English and computing to help them to gain those strengths. And that is what we have been able to do right now with integral rehabilitation in the pandemic time. So we are constantly being trained. We had to learn how to use the platforms, how to do them inclusive, how to simplify our programs and to prepare videos, to prepare guidelines, to make them visual, and then adapt them. This took us March and April when we were preparing everything, and we were keeping a permanent work plan so that our equipment is in the proper condition. And when a patient, because of whatever condition they could have, demands it, they come in a safe way to receive their laser cycles, magnetotherapy, or whatever is pertinent to them, so that we would not leave aside the attention to them. So we have our pools and our therapy rooms. So this is recommended to patients with some independence, and to let them know that those areas are safe and those activities are we are not conducting, and we recommend that to continue with their physiotherapy. Dr. Miguel Angel Aguilera established that hospital, and now and several other directors with a long run vision. They always consider sports as an essential activity, the part of recreation, the cultural part, and every one of the environments that from their inception in the institution were integrated in the rehabilitation processes, and they have allowed us, because the rehabilitation based on the community was included with supervised domicile rehabilitation It was made on Mondays, and they would receive rehabilitation at home. And that was the platform that would allow us to take through the reproduction of materials and the broadcasting of videos to follow strategies with quality and measurement capacities, preparing and sharing our products and 410 discharges and consultations. We have prevention, prevention events and prevention of disabilities, this number of users, and we improve our income. This is what we aimed. And as you can see, we have 20,320 consultations through the telephone and made personally, virtually with the patient. And we see the economic and the health parts so that they don't lose their coverage and so they can also receive the assistance they need. So among what we as professional development, we have strengthened first through the prevention and then with the technology, and now through methods and tools through which we can help our workers, or through small groups, we are training them in our facilities. As you can see, we can compare that last year in a regular way, we served 36,000 consultations until July, and this year, 20,320. The platforms would allow us now to gain accessibility, and that made me think how a rehabilitation based on community now, the inclusion based on community would lead us to the way to guide our patients in their own environments in a safe way with the support of their families, how they can conduct their activities in a safe way for the attainment of the goals. We have the pediatric population, and it's the parents who receive the training, and in the few cases that need to be served presentially or physically, we do it in a safe way. So reaching the final mile, how we are working, we are providing constant training and of the human resources and the integral management of the patients, and with the technology to have platforms that are more accessible, reaching our goal that the satisfaction of our patients, the person with disability, is an optimal serve because they are the direct users of our services and what we are expecting. At this moment, we are including our operational annual plan in our annual purchase or acquisition plan and our budget for results. We're including platform technologies and the program that we could have that would allow us to safely manage the institutionalization, to manage our patients at home. We didn't know a lot at the beginning. It was little what we had in the environment, but we didn't stop. We have looked for those alliances. We have continued with our commitment that has led us to meet the legal frameworks that was said before, that we don't have the part of inclusion and the maximal potential of development of people because of what the law says, but because of this human right for which we are made. Our motto is to be a hospital with soul, and that soul is constituted by the multidisciplinary team that works there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Karina Rodriguez. Very interesting proposal, and it is good that there is agreement with other visions. It drew my attention, this view. Thank you for your participation, and we continue with the next presentation. And now we have the participation of Dr. Veronica. Dr. Veronica Lopez Roldan, whose career is important in terms of disability and rehabilitation in Mexico. She's an expert in rehabilitation, an expert in labor medicine with a master's degree in the system of management of health by UNAM. Has been the author of 8 chapters in books on the subject, and she is the head for the review of units of rehabilitation and the coordination of integral service of second level and the medical units in the Mexican Institute for the Social Security. And she will present attention to disability and the physical rehabilitation services in social security system. We give you the floor. Well, thank you very much. I thank you for this invitation to this panel. And I also thank this knowledge shared by my predecessors because that is of a lot of feedback and information for the processes through which we are going in the Mexican Social Security Institute. I want to especially thank Inter-American Conference on Social Security to choose this subject to be presented. For us, it is actually full satisfaction to know that from there you are identifying that we need to link the disability or rehabilitation and to we at the Social Security Institute in Mexico.
Social security institution, it leads us to identify these components proposed in the panel and also define where we're going to. And it led us to a moment of reflection, and I would say with my authorities, because, the direction areas as well as the direction of economic and social benefits and medical benefits, we had like this conclusion. I want to talk about this to you. So the very first slide that you're seeing here on your screen identifies the title, and I talked about these points of services and physical rehabilitation, and this has to do with what we said a while ago about the transdiscipline. These topics make us reflect whether rehabilitation should only concentrate or focus on service, on if indeed rehabilitation is only physical. So those were the first reflections we had in our team and authorities. So this defines the pathway to take with the Social Security institution in Mexico. So we identify here the Social Security comes with our life cycle, daycare centers, birth, but not only physical things, but also all the other points that we might identify with our organism. So it also has the rehabilitation for work. This is also important for us too. One of the points that I want to, drive the intervention is one of the concepts that are well defined and established by us, but suddenly we realize that Social Security has to define this process of the interrelation among all the aspects. In this regard, I want to tell you that the concept of Social Security in the Institute is very aligned with this conceptual proposal of the analysis of Social Security established by the CISS. So this aspect of social and personal well-being contribution is on the state and seeks to protect individuals as well as groups before social risks and reduce vulnerabilities, part of our essence in the institution. And even in the moment of reflecting about this concept, when we gather information about social protection and social well-being aspects, is when we recognize goods of social security, and the need that this is not only a contribution, but it is also made universal, even for those that are not part of the social security issues. So nationally, we've had actions in order to extend all these benefits to the whole population. One important topic that we've been talking about with you, and that the reality, your talks. I'm going to spread your talks, if you allow me, because this is something that we've been working with. How to identify how rehabilitation is under that process of development, where the optimization of functioning, but beyond the optimization of the individual, the optimization of the environment is the one that has to rule us. And this has not been done if we maintain ourselves in a consultation space, in a physical space. The experiences that you've presented us about transdiscipline, or the one that has to do with community health and community-based rehabilitation, maybe due to the structure of the institution, is not possible. Nevertheless, the trend that we have is actually in order to generate these actions outside of what a consultation office is. So on the other part that we've also mentioned is the fact that we've been able to place ourselves that rehabilitation may influence not only on this level of prevention or stage of prevention, which is a third level of prevention, but it can also be placed in a continuous in any one of the levels, because it may have an incidence in the health conditions, whether it's a chronic or acute illness, or either a circumstance like getting old, or pregnancy, or stress. It's something that has given us the possibility that the rehabilitation actions may actually come into the three levels of attention, and at least in this moment, in the two levels of prevention. Regarding the term of disability, what we are generating and we're doing is that we do it from the two conceptual bases. That is the CIFF, which is only from the WHO, and the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. What we've been able to is to join together both conceptual frameworks and define from there our actions. I want to tell you that these conceptual frameworks are not only for the IMSS, but also it is based upon several institutions have proposed to run the attention to the population with disabilities. Now, this is only just a way to reflect, given the fact that the title of the panel really called our attention, and we considered it to be very singular, and the fact of these three concepts that they shared some features in common. For example, the concept is like in the evolution in both. In some, we would like to only reaffirm or reassure, such as the social security, so that it will not take us to regression, so that we would clearly identify the components which have been long time ago defined by the World Organization of Work, which can be or universal, and which is another point that is a coincidence in these concepts. The concept of the attention to disabled people based on human rights, the rehabilitation integrated to these three concepts. And these three concepts are applicable to the stages of life. And what we wish is to be identified as transversal, not only in the areas of health, but in all areas. I'm saying that we would be able to integrate these actions even in those areas that we didn't even think of, like tourism or something like that. But an important point is the need to identify and give a basis of the sources of financing for these three. And we know that these sources of financing are under stress and talking about the on security in the social on security, the IMSS is the basic instrument for social security nationwide for all workers, men and women and their family. The institute at the beginning was generated to give attention to the working population. The need to extend these benefits made it clear to include different population segments. But nowadays, the vision considers more populations with subscribed family medicine sector, which is the way that we measure the potential population. We say that by June 2019, we would identify 51 million inhabitants. IMSS has more than 432,000 workers. Out of these, almost 250,000 are under healthcare. Then we have more than 3,000 operation units, and they dedicate to medical services. And some others that I would like to talk about are those that economic benefits. Why do I say this? Because Social Security implies protection and health benefits, but also well-being benefits and protection. And we're going to see how this is included in the insurances and how it is associated to the concept of rehabilitation and disability. On the other hand, we have the great component of the IMSS, which is the IMSS well-being, which gives attention to population that does not necessarily have a social security, and that is given through, from services that are well established and well defined. What does this include? What does social security include in IMSS? I mentioned something that we clearly identify that includes and the IMSS grants to people, and the images go and are correlated to this. First of all, we have all this medical attention going from giving healthcare even for not those care holders, administration of drugs, and surgery and hospitalization, which includes rehabilitation too, something which is defined that whether in the end, in the legislation, we might identify that rehabilitation is only seen for workers. By the moment we conceptualize rehabilitation as part of the integral attention, then we expand it to the whole family members and the whole benefits for them. The obstetric assistance, the temporal permissions of not working due to several circumstances, but it also includes cultural centers, sports centers, etc. Something which is very important is the pensions due to work risks. And here we evaluate this disability concept due to the work they do. And the pensions derived that maybe are an important part of security, because it allows that families may have some foundation to continue. So we also have IMSS Bienestar and other segments of the population that I was talking to you about, which are students, for example, high-level students that have an access to protection in health given from the IMSS. Now we have included some other actions, such as the permission of absence of work with children, for parents with children with cancer, inclusion of house working people, and daycare centers, etc. So I would like to have an exercise, a web exercise, but I will give you the link and I will give you the example. In the official web page of the IMSS, there is an image that establishes the life cycle. In each one of these points, I had the example of adolescents. It shows us a series of actions that Social Security gives this age group. I only took two for this group. So how this pension for adolescents, pension service, and what it covers for children under 16s, or those that are over 16 and up to 25, and the older kids older than 16 years with a disability, and the actions in the medical areas. I took this as an example, but if we see the children of 16 years old have the opportunity to have these cultural and sports activities that the actual institute gives. And I also here only mention the rehabilitation work in the institution, but it is also defined in the three levels of attention. This to us is a reason to identify ourselves with the institution. Social Security is a foundation for us, and it constitutes one of the points where disability and the attention to the population with disabilities, and actually the rehabilitation activities, we are incorporating those in all the segments, talking about this transversality concept in all the areas of population. I want to tell you that to us, getting together, the doctor was talking, it's not only the social model or the biopsychosocial model, but we also have to identify the whole components to give attention to the population with disabilities. We consider as a basis the conceptual framework, or the CISS framework, but we accept that the Convention of Rights for people with disabilities sets the point of actions that we have to have. And in this moment, what we want, the bodies of the CONADIs and the health sector and education sectors, is to generate actions regarding disabilities from this point onwards. So I underline these environmental factors because this is where we find social security. That is to say, if we put this here, this social security point, and several people said this before, did how this influences as a determinant of health, and in this case of disability, we will be able to understand many of the processes that we are running in different countries. So what do we have here? Here we're gonna have some identification of surveys. We were talking about 18 million people with disabilities from the studies that have been reported. So what I am showing you is the result of the National Inquiry of the Demographic Dynamics. It is based upon the questions from the group of Washington. These questions have been homologated for the populational information for census and surveys. So what I want to say is two things. First of all, is that half of the population with disability are elderly people, so that we will have to think of concepts of disability, rehabilitation, and social security, and or, as we are now doing in our country, aspects of social protection actually for elderly people. One more point, which is important, is the differentiation or definition between men and women, and most of it, some aspects of population, as it was said before, we could not neglect, the pediatric population, actually, because it is here where in these ages, this is where we would be able to have an influence in order to define which is the future development. So it represents almost 8 million of the inhabitants of a country with a population with disabilities. And out of these 6.5 million people, they go to some sort of medical service. The distribution as for the access of Social Security, I want to tell you that the last piece of information that we have talks about the institution has a membership of almost 40% of the adult population. Then we would have to add the new definitions, operational definitions of what the institution of health and well-being is in Mexico. Now, as for disability, what do we have in the institution? We have a nominal registration of right holders with disabilities that has 2 million people registry. This is data from December 2019. Nevertheless, this is something that we have to take. Actually, we have to update in order to align it to the new concept. As for the disability regards, we actively participate in the diffusion on the Convention on Rights of People with Disabilities, and the Institute has a committee on the rights of people with disability in charge of non-medical areas where the association and population, civic population association participate. So we have actions that boost the normative action. So we have actions of inclusion that we're going to see some of them, and the participation by intersectors. This kind of participation has been focused on having the national system on disability in 2 great areas: the homologation of administration registries in as disability regards, and the other one is that we have a debt with the population with disabilities, which is the certification process of people with disabilities. Now, as for rehabilitation regards, when we have this call to action 2030 in 2017, the fact of establishing the actions and the recommendations given from these processes by the WHO led us to talk about this, the integration of rehabilitation in the health system. So to us, it is very rewarding that by this moment, some of the changes that we're going to see in the regulation and legislation may identify this kind of actions. But besides that, the fact that we've been able to include in different moments of the process action of health and illness and levels of attention and the actions of rehabilitation. The other point that we were mentioning is warranting the assignation or allocation of financial resources. I think it is a process of constant work that we have to carry out, and that involves or having these backup, scientific backup, and even what you're telling us about the transdiscipline in order to actually take us to this exercise of warranting the resources for health. So this is what we have in as for rehabilitation matters. The institutions that grant these rehabilitation services are the Secretaría de Salud in the different or the health ministry in the different aspects. I'm talking about the federation and the state institutions, the INSABI, the DIF national system, which is pretty important for the rehabilitation in Mexico, because, due to the importance it has in communities that are far, the IMSS for the workers in the states and the national institutes that are pretty important as a leadership point for the generation of knowledge and the high specialty hospitals such as the IMSS, the National Defense Secretary and the Navy, as well as other state entities. In IMSS, we give rehabilitation from our infrastructure, which is 188 rehabilitation services. We are located at the 3 levels of attention. We have units of physical medicine and rehabilitation with a great extension, pretty complex, with the formation of resources. And we also have in hospitals of second level of attention, and we also have family medicine units. So this is one of the points that where I'm going to talk to you about. We have 466 specialists for rehabilitation, 1,515 rehabilitators. Our challenge is language therapy, not only dealing with physical therapy, and the Institute gives 1 million consultations as for um, rehabilitation regards, and 10 million psychotherapy sessions. So the muscle skeleton rehabilitation is one of the most important things. From 2015, we've been working with heart rehabilitation. So we have these heart rehabilitation services where we establish the different stages of it. 23 hospitals are working with this first phase of cardiac rehabilitation. We work in the work rehabilitation as well as for in the rehabilitation centers, and the linkage to other agencies in the country, such as the Ministry of Work. We have human communication services, but this is one of our challenges, how to identify and formalize and systematize this kind of attention. And the services of family medicine were created actually, or, you know, the installation of these kind of services were created to make it more uh, accessible to the population, the rehabilitation, in order to diminish or shorten the times of reference between the different levels of attention, but also to have the services in the communities, the hospital rehabilitation. Also, we have a rehabilitation hospital in this moment with change in the activities due to the contingency. And something which to us has been pretty important is the participation of rehabilitation in the metabolic control, ambulatory and metabolic control units. But the important part of this is that we were able to include in the process of prevention. Sorry. So the action, we're running out of time, please. So the actions as for, I cannot see them. The actions are regarding disability. Actually, with the contingency, we have the basis of rehabilitation of lungs in the institute. So I will leave you a segment that then you will see this in the presentation. So the basis of this lung rehabilitation that offers this possibility to include all the aspects that were mentioned a little while ago. That is to say, there are doctors in rehabilitation. Besides being in in their offices, they will be able to identify these great actions that they have to do. We're running out of time. We're seeing your presentation. We're going to close, please. Please close your presentation. We're going to close with this. Next, please. So basically what we have is a change in the normativity of the legislation in health that allows us to include ourselves in all these processes. So where the challenges is inclusion of rehabilitation in integral attention, medical attention, disability in a model of human rights, the access to attention in rehabilitation at all levels of attention and prevention without diminishing the quality and reaffirmation of social security, and to capitalize the learnings due to the pandemic of COVID-19. We're going to have this long rehabilitation process. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. And then here we have, I will give the floor to Dr. Daisy, our director, please. Thank you very much, Fernando, and all the speakers. they give us a very good scope and a view where we talked about many proposals that strengthen the conceptual framework and also the methodological part where we recommend to go through transdisciplinary where we saw where that we saw in the definitions disabilities within the term of a complex problem with all these means. And I have an important point that I would like to open the possibility that there might be a participation with the panelists, because a person with disability writes to us. I believe that according to the current reality, we've been talking in several of the moments of this webinar about what the current pandemic and its challenges. We've been talking about teleconsultation and different methods where we try to get closer to the person with disabilities, and IT technology is involved. So the person talks to us and says that one of the problems that they face and their family members also is the use of these technologies, and the family has not education background about this. There are no organizations, neither authorities that may support the families in this. So I believe that in this moment we have this the digital of it, literation. So this is where I think that from different scenarios in a project that we have a virtual center for knowledge, we also have to find that from the Pan American Organization of Health, we've seen about the topic that we have to start with
Both at the level of persons, of the level of the services of health in general, and the users, because even if the pandemics has established a challenge and made us go through time in a different way, if it was not present, because from one day to the next made us face this new scenario. This was being directed to virtuality. It is increasing, and it is becoming part of everyday life at homes. So the question of the panel members is, above all, what is your idea from your different scenarios to improve this aspect? And again, I will repeat the question of the person with a disability. The question is, one of the problems that we are now facing, the people with disability and their families, is the use of new technologies. The thing is that the family does not academic training, and the little availability of the professors wouldn't help. There is not organizations of authorities that are helping the families with this. So I give you the floor. Perhaps if we have a screen with the participants, the same way of work, I'm sorry. Well, I think, yes, please go ahead. I think, as Karina said properly, there are things that the pandemics made us discover the needs and the lack of use of platforms. It's a generalized problem that affects us all, not only from the institutions, but in homes and also from the academia. It is something we knew that would happen. We were preparing for that, but the pandemics made us solve the lost time, or to shorten that lost time, and to hurriedly train for the management of these platforms. I think that an effort we need to make is we need to think about these technologies to reach as much people as possible, starting with children, professionals in different environments. We need to get trained. I also need that there are things that came to stay. All this part of telemedicine or teletraining, which is not new, is part of the tools of all professionals of health and especially of professionals of rehabilitation. I also think that we need to work on the training of professionals for those of us working in this environment. This needs to be part of the profile of the new professionals. Some physicians, we need to rethink the way we are conducting our activities. And well, this is especially for psychologists, therapists, and we all need to be part of this. And I understand that the lack of knowledge on technology was there, but the what the pandemics made is to make us aware of our needs in terms of communication. And we need to rethink the way we are being trained. I would like to add what Marco stated, that we have a problem of the future, but it is here already because a lot of people has been left aside. And in this moment, as we were stating, we all before, these moments are telling us that we were caught in some part of the past, and the people we need to provide service, they need to quickly change our ways of thinking. We psychologists, physical therapists, we need to start become more flexible in mental models to reach as the patient needs, and that involves many times two very different moments here now. How do we do it? Because the time is now, it is not tomorrow. So for today, here, to make it possible, well, the professionals need to change mental models to get adapted to what the patient needs, and to do that very quickly, to leave the stereotypes aside and to simultaneously rethink the terms of complexity. And once we are trained there, we would be able to give a quick response because the professionals would quickly provide a response to the complexity, to the problem we have. So the pandemic is coming and we still don't have the installed capacity with a method that could solve the complexity. This is not an opinion, it's a public publication. A complex problem is solved with a multidisciplinary focus or approach. And we need to think on the professional model. Otherwise, we will go back to reductionism and to think that telerehabilitation will be the answer. No, it will be a part of a complex system of attention to people with disabilities. But in order to know what part of it is important, we need to change the modality of information, especially remote information. I would also like to add that in a country like Mexico, actually, digitization of everything has been complex because there is areas where there's no way to digitize anything. So that would prevent to have access one the real condition and well a person with a disability on top of that, well, there is a lack of access because in other contexts are starting to move in that direction. Today, the pandemics was, as Alejandra was framing, the people outside of inclusion, especially educational inclusion, because I think that was part of what the intention of the question, that the parents do not have this training to support their children. And it is not only for people with disability, this is the social context all over Mexico. So I think that perhaps we need to rethink the strategies that are taking place and adjust them, adapt them to the country, because we want people to get adapted to the strategy, and that is not like that. It is far more complex. Perhaps to make them participate more with this strategy so that we can include them. Yes, anybody else? Well, I would like, please, Karina Rodriguez, I want to share with you the question, according to what I understood, is to see the education of the caregiver or the relative. We, in our hospital, we have a library, and there we have schooling activities with the support of the librarian. What we did was an strategical analysis with the Ministry of Education and the channel of government in the open television. There we are giving classes, and we have education or schooling uh, programs. So those alliances is what we need, because we need to make people grow, the community leader, the caregiver, the relatives in the part of the technology, as we need in the labor ministry. Through Coursera in Guatemala, we have developed a broad platform to train people in computing and English language for people with some disability, and also for regular people who do not have any disability, in order to strengthen environments. It is not only the plan and the program for people with disability, but also for those who in their environment could have that training and, well, to progress. So because pandemics has made us has made us aware of the deficiencies, it made visible everything that we were working on, and to try to look for alliances. We don't have to be working one by one, because there are many areas and programs with which we can have some alliances, and to create an interinstitutional alliance. I would like to comment something. When in cooperation with Piña Palmeira, a few years ago, I visited a small village, or well, several small villages. We were doing community work because Piña Palmeira works in terms of collectivity. There's a team visiting the communities, and they do not have a vertical organization. They are a collective rotative organization that participates with everybody, and they share responsibilities. And this allows that people working in the field to become sensitive to their responsibility commitment, and to acknowledge the people who needs attention. And there were two core elements, because in those small villages we visited two of them. There was a group of communities. In one of them there was a family with 14 members in the family, eight of them with a disability, and the rest of them in the other community, there were two members in the family, and six of them had extreme disability. They were laying on boards on the ground under the worst conditions you can imagine in terms of poverty. And I was listening to this, and I was thinking of cases of this nature. Well, these areas in Oaxaca with extreme poverty and with a lot of isolation, I think that you also mentioned that, that geographical isolation and condition of natural and social violence that they are facing. And that makes me think on these conditions, on the possibilities of models and projects of work. I find it very important, because we cannot miss this opportunity. The vision of disability can be perceived from different viewpoints. Institutionally, that corresponds to the government plans, to the commitments. Uh, the university one, that has to do with the training of human resources, with a plan of training and for the future, but also the community, that the people, how the people organizes within the community. And I like a lot the comment of a colleague working for Derargi and with uh, communities, and says that we should not forget that indigenous knowledge is also knowledge, a different way of knowledge. And on top of the community, the social organizations as such that commit themselves under a subject, I think that we need to link this part of the condition of the participation models, because the person with disability needs to have a position, a place, a voice, a vote to cast. And among these possibilities, the question being presented to you, I think that puts in evidence what we're going through. This is only food for thought. Okay, I think we have had two fruitful hours of exchange of knowledge. Very interesting. We conclude this activity becoming more sensitive with the situation where the pandemics makes us face excluding factors, and we're dealing a subject that makes us promote inclusion, which is a complex subject. And under the circumstances when we face all of this, it is important for us to discuss with the subject with all the people who have participated in this webinar. And we want to leave you the idea of what we have commented, and especially promote strategic alliances, which is one of the most powerful tools in this moment that could lead us to solve the problem and to help us. Many times we think about a definite territory when establishing alliances, but now in this environment of the Social Security Inter-American Conference, we're united. We're helping us in different subjects, and these scenarios are trying to promote these alliances. So thank you very much for your participation. And we also, in some countries, we have who have sent presentations in the last minute. Well, can you comment on that? Yes, I will do that. In the moment of preparing the webinar, we made several invitations, and in the last minute, something happened, and they only recently answered from Ecuador and Peru. So we are still pending that part of them. And I'm sorry, but something we were talking about is the complexity focus that makes us think differently. And it cannot be realistic if we do not consider the social conditions of the community. We need to give the voice to these people. So we have this possibility pending, yes, to have a second stage with the subject, and we hope that you have your participation as well. So we bid farewell to all the participants, and through the chat, you can make your comments, your feedback, your opinions that will be referred to experts. Thank you very much. So we hope we continue with Rosa Idalia next time. Toño, Vero, everybody, both Carinas, Vero, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for sharing for this integration. See you later. Thank you very much. See you later. We will get connected.